The old Jeep bounced down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. Greg, driving, gripped the steering wheel tight, his knuckles white. He could feel his 6 friends staring at him, their faces lit up by the dashboard's green glow. They were here. Camp Camden.
We made it.
The woods crowded the road, a wall of dark green and even darker shadows. Even as the sun set, the trees seemed to watch them, twisted branches like bony fingers. The air, thick with the smell of pine needles and wet dirt, carried a chill that got inside the Jeep, settling in Greg's stomach like a bad feeling. He ignored it, forcing a smile as they finally pulled into the clearing where they'd camp.
This place is kinda creepy, don't you think?
Come on, Sarah. It's just a bunch of trees.
The woods felt closer here, heavier. The silence, broken only by the chirping of hidden bugs, was thick, like something was about to happen. As they unpacked the Jeep, Greg couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. The woods were watching, waiting. He really hoped Kenny's story was just a story. The campfire flames danced, making shadows that stretched and twisted, just like the fear twisting in Greg's stomach. His friends laughed around the fire, their faces red from the long drive and cheap beer. But Greg couldn't relax. Not with the woods all around them, and not with Kenny's story hanging in the air.
They say he haunts these woods looking for someone to hurt.
Kenny, who always liked being the center of attention, was telling the story, his voice low and spooky. The legend of Pete the Hacking Lumberjack, they called it. A local story whispered around here but never told out loud after dark. Until now.
They say you can hear him coming, a hacking cough, the roar of his chainsaw.
Every word felt like a punch to Greg's stomach. He looked around at his friends, their faces lit by the fire. He saw fear, yeah, but also excitement, a weird kind of interest. He wished he could be that clueless. Kenny kept telling the story, his voice painting a picture of a man named Pete. A lumberjack, rough and tough, a loner who loved the quiet woods and the steady rhythm of his work. But Pete had a secret, a darkness that stuck to him like the sawdust on his clothes. It was in his lungs, a rattling, wheezing sickness that made it hard to breathe and reminded him every day that he was going to die. Emphysema.
He was a walking ghost, death walking around. They said the forest itself was afraid of him.
The hacking cough became Pete's scary signature, a warning that he was near, echoing through the silent woods, a constant reminder that he was dying. The other lumberjacks, tough guys used to hard work, stayed away from him, their fear hidden by pretending they were disgusted.
It was just a story, right?
Greg shivered, pulling his jacket tighter. He could almost hear it, that hacking cough, echoing through the trees, getting closer. He pushed the thought away, mad at himself for letting Kenny's story scare him. It was just a story, right? The story got worse, like stories often do, from normal to really scary. One day Pete was working, the usual sound of his saw mixing with the sound of his hard breathing. Then, silence. A silence scarier than all the noises of the woods. The other lumberjacks found him later, his broken body crushed under a fallen tree, his chainsaw lying quiet nearby. The accident was fast, brutal. A good thing, some whispered. But the woods, they said, never forget.
They say his spirit couldn't leave. He was trapped here, his anger and pain echoing through the trees.
The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky, each one a quick, fiery reminder of Pete's pain. Greg could almost smell the metallic smell of blood, the sick, sweet smell of decay. He looked at his friends, their faces pale in the flickering light, and he knew he wasn't the only one who could feel it now. Something, watching, waiting. The night got darker, the fire died down to embers, and the shadows grew longer, stretching out like grabbing claws. Greg lay awake in his tent, his heart pounding. Kenny's story played over and over in his mind, making the fear in his stomach worse. He wished he hadn't let Kenny tell that story. A twig snapped.
Whispering. What was that?
Greg sat up, every sense alert. He could hear the leaves rustling, the wind whispering through the trees. But there was something else. A low, throaty sound. A cough. He held his breath, listening. Silence. Then, it came again. Closer. Followed by the clear sound of a chainsaw starting up. The sound ripped through the night, tearing the silence apart. Terror, cold and sharp, flooded through him. This wasn't a story. This was real. A scream from outside his tent confirmed his worst fears. Greg scrambled out of his sleeping bag, his heart pounding. He could hear yelling, feet running, the scared gasps of his friends. Everything was chaos.
Sarah, Mark, where are you?
He saw Sarah, her face white with terror, running towards the trees, her foot catching on a root, sending her falling to the ground. He saw Mark, his eyes wide with panic, trip and fall, his flashlight rolling away into the darkness. And then he saw it. A figure, tall and scary, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. It held something in its hand, something that shined in the darkness. The chainsaw roared again, a terrible sound of metal and rage. Greg froze, his blood turning cold. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He could only watch as the figure came closer. The figure moved with a weird kind of smoothness, its heavy boots seeming to glide over the ground. It stopped in front of Mark, its head tilted at a strange angle, like it was looking over its victim. The chainsaw whirred, a scary hum. Greg knew he had to do something. Anything. He grabbed a branch, its rough bark scratching his hand. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He ran forward, yelling.
Leave him alone!
The figure turned, its head snapping up, and for a split second Greg saw it. The face, pale and skinny, framed by dirty, tangled hair. Eyes, hollow and black, stared into his, filled with an old, unstoppable rage. Then, everything went black. The last thing Greg heard was the loud roar of the chainsaw. To be continued. Thank you all for tuning in for part 1 of this creepy story from Father Lokk's Horror House's 7-Minute Mayhem horror series. Welcome to the family, all new subscribers. It's truly an honor to call you a Lokk. Please subscribe and hit your notification bell if you haven't already, so you won't miss part 2 of this tale of mayhem. Be safe out there. And in the words of Father Lokk, always remember and always know that he loves y'all. Bye, family, and thank you so much for being a great member of it.